Hello, hello, everyone.
Hey,
Welcome to An Honest Look.
hey, yes, and welcome, Ryan. I'm Rick, and we have Fatih with us too today. We actually have Fatih every day.
Okay, you got, you got this. I'm here, in case you haven't noticed.
Okay, we're live. We're live. We're not going to retake, but anyways, yeah, good to see you guys.
Good to
Great
see
to
you.
be with you.
We're so excited to have Ryan here to talk to us about his experience. I want to introduce him to you properly. In case you haven't received all my reels and all my messages on social media, I just want to introduce Ryan Kopyar. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Properly. So Ryan is an internationally licensed counselor. He's a published author of several books on psychology and self-development. He's a holistic wellness expert, certified fitness trainer, and a sports nutritionist. And he has an extensive personal experience with trauma and many things that he has been through in his life. Frankly, when I read his bio when we first met and talked about him coming on the show, I was just so impressed by seeing where this man is at, considering what he has been through in his life. And obviously, I'm going to let him speak to that. But I'm just pointing this out because I really want to impress upon people that anything is truly possible, that there are no challenges that are impossible to overcome, and that you can come back from any place. And who's better than Ryan to speak to this? So I'm just going to give the floor to you and let you tell our audience where you come from, what your experience has been, and what prompted you to do the work that you do today, helping others through their trauma.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's great to be with you. I'm excited to have this conversation. Yeah, so I believe that we should be a soul and not a role, and so I embrace all of those titles, and I worked very hard for those titles. But at the end of the day, I follow my heart, which is to help people, to love on people, to believe in people, and to be vulnerable and to share a little bit about my story. We all have our own unique experiences in life, and those are unique and special to each and every one of us. When I share my story, it's just a little bit about my experience, and hopefully creates a meeting ground where other people can connect and say, hey, in your imperfection, Ryan, I can connect with some piece of myself. And I know if you can do it, it gives me hope that I can do it. So that's kind of just a little bit of overall premises of kind of how I look at my work and how I look at helping people. Where would you like me to start off as far as my story goes? Kind of all the way back to childhood?
Yeah, I mean, as deep as you want to go, you can reference whatever you want, but I think it's important for the audience to really understand what you've been through and like how you got to do the remarkable work that you do now and what drives you. Because you're talking about I am a soul, right? And not,
Yeah.
I forget how you worded it. It's so true, right? Like where does this driving force come from? And I believe that when it comes from a very deep place within ourselves, the way we serve others and we're able to help others is so much more impactful. And yeah, so I'm gonna let that, up to you where you want to start. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And I write about this in my book, Unlock the Power of Your Mind, as a kind of a little part autobiography. So, a few days after Christmas, and shortly before my third birthday, my mother, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, with my sister Megan, was working at a bank and a law office. I'm sorry. And as she was beginning to wrap up to close up the law offices for the night, there was a individual that came in to commit a robbery, and in the process of committing that robbery, my mother was there as an innocent bystander and was raped and killed. And I have no conscious memory of that event. I was just a young boy. But that young Ryan, that little Ryan, his mom never came home, and his sister was never born. And I believe that trauma and that pain and that loss, although we may not experience it or have knowledge of it on a conscious level, is at a subconscious level and can get stored in our body. And so, that was an event which I did not process for almost 3 decades of my life. And I would say, my dad later remarried, and I was surrounded by a family of love. I was great in school. I was an A student. I was a travel hockey player going up to Canada to play hockey, right? So by all accounts, from the outside, you would look at me and say, there's no pain, nothing ever. I mean, obviously something happened to this young man, but on all accounts, he's doing pretty well with his life. And I think I was for a period of time. And then later I kind of realized, wow, I'm making some bad decisions as it relates to drugs and alcohol. And I didn't even know why I was doing it. I didn't even understand what the void was that I was trying to fill. But that void was the loss of my mother, the loss of my unborn sister, the fact that, little Ryan's mom never came home from work that night. So maybe there's an opportunity to kind of pause there and we can unpack that.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure that is something that is very vulnerable for you. And as someone who lost her dad when I was a kid, I think it's important to go there to our childhood when there are traumatic events like that and really look at that, because it can really stem all from there, right? And I also really relate to, you were not there, I was not there when my dad was executed. It was a very traumatic loss as well. And I didn't actually witness that, but I too didn't process that for the longest time. And I actually believe that there's parts of me that have really repressed a lot of it. There's a lot of black spots in my memory, right? And because as a child, you just don't know how to process those feelings. They're too difficult to even conceive or understand. Your brain is just not. I was 8, you were 3. I mean, that's even different at 3 years old, right? And so when you mentioned that, that really rang so true for myself, right? Yeah, I was not able to process any of this. And it did show up in so many different ways in my life later on. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability to share that as well. I think that vulnerability is a beautiful meeting ground. And we live in a world today where, everybody wants to have the social media highlight reel and everybody wants to make their life seem super great. I work with a lot of individuals, and I know you guys do too. I don't know anybody's life that's great 24/7, 365, right? And and I think that when we can really, and it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, but when we can really open up and be vulnerable, it creates a meeting ground. And it is through that meeting ground where we can really foster and facilitate deeper levels of connection. And in those deeper levels of connection, we can facilitate deeper levels of healing, because there are many people that have experienced trauma in their childhood, right? And it very often gets repressed and pushed down. But it's always going to come out in some way, shape, or form, often in non-serving behavior patterns, thought patterns, communication patterns later in life.
I just there's one thing and I love how you mentioned vulnerability, because for me, my experience is that vulnerability is a very natural process, a natural feeling, or something that we naturally do when we take the covers off ourselves, take the hard shell off ourselves. Like you cannot help but be vulnerable when you don't have all the pretenses and disguises and the shoulds and how I should show up, all that layers of thinking. And we want to be vulnerable. Drop the persona,
Yes.
drop the ego, right?
Yeah.
And then it comes naturally. Like you just want to open up, and this is what I enjoy about our conversations, just on our show, is that we it's an honest look. Like, we just want to be as honest and as open as possible and show up for people in an authentic way. And that's what I noticed about you right away, Ryan, is how authentic you really are.
I appreciate that, Rick. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I can tell we're going to have a great conversation today. This is just going to flow. You're absolutely right. And I think that for me, that pivotal moment of ego death, right, or kind of the disillusionment or the ego kind of coming down, was when I was arrested. It was in August of 2013. Walked out of the post office. DEA is there. NYPD undercover is there with guns drawn. And that was perhaps the lowest moment of my life professionally and personally as well in some respects. But it was also a moment where in that jail cell later that afternoon and that evening, there was a part of me that died. Part of my ego died. And I had to really sit there in the jail cell. Person to the right of me was going through withdrawal from opiates and just screaming out in pain. And there were some other individuals that were just screaming and yelling. And I said, wow, Ryan, this is where you have put yourself. And I had to really take accountability for that, right? I was a good person living in a bad way. And a part of, as I said, a part of me died that night. And that was the ego, right? About who is it that I think that I need to be? Who is it that needs to be loved and accepted, right? But that was for the ego. It wasn't for the soul. But I had been chasing after that with the ego. And it was through my arrest and the subsequent dark period of time afterwards when I went through the legal battle where my ego very much died. And of course, that's was kind of an ongoing process, and maybe still is to some extent, right? But it is through that ego death or through that ego disillusionment that vulnerability becomes a natural state. To your point, Rick.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Like, we've all heard, through our own interactions with clients and others, is, here you are sitting in a jail cell with this experience happening. The switch could have gone so easily the other way. You could have just been a victim, right? And bought and kept that going. But there was I don't know if you can speak to it, but there was something there that sort of, I don't know, woke you up or pointed you in a different direction or showed you something different. And I'm always curious about that, because I know a lot of people that would have been in that same situation and would have been much more bitter, angry, lashing out onto the world that you caused this, you made me where I am today, kind of a thing. And that wasn't your experience.
No, it was an opportunity to take a hard look in the mirror, right, and say, okay, man, you grew up in a loving family. I mean, after the death of my mother, I would say I was surrounded by love, right? So you grew up in a loving family. You got your bachelor's degree, right? You graduated from college. Here you are, soon to be a vice president at the largest fitness club in the United States. And it's like, man, you're doing all this other stuff on the side. Is that who you really are? Is that who you want to be? And perhaps most deeply, it was, is this a person that my mother would be proud of? If my mother was alive, right? What would she say? And how am I honoring her behaving in this way? So all of those thoughts were going through my mind. As I reflect on it now and I go through even deeper levels of spiritual growth, it is, I know that my soul is here, and I believe that this is the case for many individuals in the helping profession. Our soul is here to help people, to love people, to help to facilitate healing. I was certainly not doing that with some of the ways that I was living my life. And the more connected I got with my soul, the more clear that path became. And it just made going back down that road, I didn't think about it.
Right. Very cool.
So it sounds like, I guess I'm going to have to ask this question. I've asked this question multiple times, and I'm having a hard time answering it because that's not my experience, and perhaps it's not your experience either. But I wonder, everyone says, I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my experience with you so that you don't have to hit that bottom to change, right? And I guess my question is, do we believe that it's possible to have that massive shift without hitting rock bottom? That was not my experience, right? So I'm curious, right?
Yes, I think it's absolutely possible. Here's the thing. You have to want it to begin. You have to want to make the shift to begin with, right? And if things are going good and the ego's riding high and, all the things of that nature, the ego's not going to say, hey, wait a second, let's take this deep journey inwards to find out who I really am, right? So I think that's often why it happens at the rock bottom. But I don't think that that's a prerequisite. And I think the deeper thing is there's a lot of people that hit rock bottoms. And I've hit more than one rock bottom in my life. Even when you hit rock bottom, it still takes a tremendous amount of courage to say, okay, why is this happening, for me and not to me? So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no,
yeah.
I love your perspective on it. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my experience, and you make a very good point. If that motivator has to be there, something that pushes you. If you're very comfortable in your life, there's some things that are like, okay, like you're not gonna have that strong motivation to go do the inner work that it takes, frankly, to make massive transformation happen for yourself, right? So it's like, I guess, what would be the thing that motivates people? And I'm not able to answer that because I never experienced it that way, right? What pushed me to make changes in my life was hitting enough walls where I was so freaking uncomfortable that I couldn't go back to doing things the way I've always done them. So I was just curious to hear what your take on that was, and I really loved your answer to it. It's a good perspective. So I wondered, so then that was that, would you say that incident of being arrested was the pivotal moment that from there everything started shifting, or was there like a journey from there into doing what you're doing now? How did that?
Yeah, there was an incredible journey. That was only one of the rock bottoms. So here I am.
Okay.
I spent 6 months so embarrassed that I really didn't even come out of my basement. That was probably one of the darkest periods of my life. Right, work hard to get back into the fitness industry, start to kind of build my way back in, and had a couple ups and downs in that regard because obviously now I have a little bit of a checkered past, but was able to kind of break back into things. And then in May of 2018, I got hit with what I call kind of like the triple whammy. So in May of 2018, on the day of my rehearsal dinner, I found out that my fiance had been cheating on me in another relationship. So the wedding kind of on the day of the rehearsal dinner. A couple months after that, about like, I don't know, 60 to 75 days after that, a job which I had recently started, hey, thanks for the hard work, but you're no longer needed here. So that happened. And then September of 2018, new job. I'm thinking, okay, things are going good. I just kind of got out of those two, kind of difficult things, right? A marriage that never happened and getting fired from your job, all within a short window period of time. That'd be enough to knock your socks off, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the universe had one more in store for me. I'm stopped at a red light. I get hit from behind by a SUV going about 40 miles an hour, bang up my neck, bang up my shoulder, bang up my back. I've got PTSD that I'm not even aware of for the first 3 or 4 months after the accident. And it was through that healing process and through that, second set of rock bottoms that eventually led me into re-engaging in school for my clinical mental health master's program.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's and I love that something that you said that resonated again. When you have experienced PTSD, you don't necessarily recognize it right away. That was my experience too.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of research on this, and this was my area of focus in my master's program. This is something that not a lot of people really understand, and it's not talked about enough. If we experience so there's traumatic events and then there's trauma. The traumatic event is what happens on the outside. The trauma is what happens inside of us. So there are people that may experience a traumatic event, but not necessarily experience trauma inside. For individuals, Fatí, like you or me, that experience that traumatic event very early on in childhood, and I'll speak for myself, experience trauma inside, it puts us in, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you could say an exponentially increased risk of developing PTSD if we are exposed to another traumatic event later on in life. So that's what happened for me, but it just took me a long time to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Why am I white knuckling it on the road, on the highway? It wasn't like the car accident almost killed me. I mean, it banged me up pretty bad, but it wasn't like my friends that experienced PTSD when they came back from Iraq, and so I kind of wasn't quite sure how this was all working or adding up or whatever the case may be. Well, here's what I came to realize. I was already predisposed from the unhealed trauma from my childhood.
Wow, thank you for that. You just taught me something. I just learned something from you. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I experienced PTSD many years later. It was about 15 years ago when my husband died. And I was there the moment that he died. And not only that we triggered all of that suppressed stuff around my dad's death, but also I was reliving that moment that he died. And I was reliving many moments actually leading up to his death, because he died of cancer. So he died of an illness, really witnessed him, be consumed by the illness. And once he passed away, every time I saw someone with blue eyes, I would relive the moment that he died, because I was looking at him. And I didn't recognize it. I was completely paralyzed. I could not live my life. I could not do anything. Like, in fact, there were moments where people would help me off the subway, because I would just burst into tears and be frozen standing looking at someone with blue eyes and not be able to move. So it makes sense what you're saying, that it kind of I was predisposed to that. Yeah. Thank you
really
for sharing that.
I appreciate your vulnerability to share that as well.
It is an interesting subject, the post-traumatic stress. And I mean, I was a paramedic for 30 years, and there's, exposed to a number of different incidences, right? And what I was really curious about was the fact that all these responders were having different kinds of reactions or experiences on the same events. Why aren't you troubled by this? And sometimes I kind of question my sanity about why some things didn't affect me, but affect others in a bigger way, right? And then there would be incidences where, it kind of touched a nerve, or you kind of sat with it for a bit, and then other people just kind of washed it off, or at least it appeared that way, right? Because a lot of what I find in the responder field is that because we are helpers, we are first responders, we have to have some kind of Superman mentality, that we have to show up as the strongest we can be and not show our vulnerability or right, because not only we just can't go home after that call, we have a stack of calls to go through the rest of the day, kind of a thing, right? So I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it is interesting how for me, and this is where I kind of point to, it's not necessarily the work. It's not the work that's working inside that it's causing it, because if it was the work, there would be a lot more PTSD kind of a thing, right? Or everybody would be having the same effect, given the circumstances, right? So I think I don't know. through your research, I find that most of it is from an inside out perspective. Like there's something within that's making the changes, making the difference. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I see that very much in my work, to your point about kind of the alpha male and just bury the feelings down inside and things of that nature, right? And I think that to an extent, and can have, this is why healthy outlets and support systems are so important, right? Because to have that healthy outlet, to have somebody that you can speak to, it might help to release some of that before it really turns into a deeper trauma which gets experienced inside. And so you're right, Rick. I think that there's a multitude of different reasons as to why somebody may or may not develop it, why somebody may be able to handle or cope with things better than another individual. I can tell you this, I believe that we're coming into a point as the human collective where we're really starting to honor the fact that a lot of people have trauma inside and have been burying it inside for a long time, and it's really starting to come out now. And although that is a painful experience to face that pain and to turn that pain into purpose, although that's scary, right, it's also incredibly freeing. And to the extent that we can begin to break the stigma around that and normalize it and have conversations around it, I think that helps us to really heal as a collective together.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I it's an innocent process, and I think the deeper we seek to understand, as opposed to think that there's something wrong. Recently somebody just posted a really heated argument because the guy didn't get his coffee the way he wanted his coffee. you know, you know, there's some healing that needs to happen here.
Right. I love what you pointed to, that stepping into your power involves that piece of the one thing that we have avoided, and that's why we've gotten where we've gotten, right, which is the healing piece. There's no way to use it as your power unless you heal it, unless you're willing to look at it, unless you're willing to go through the discomfort of that. Frankly, it's going to get uncomfortable, but if you let it sit there, like, going back to your point that there's a predisposition, that predisposition is there because there was something unresolved within.
Mm-hmm.
That it was resolved, before the, traumatic event happened, probably wouldn't have affected us in the ways that it did. But because it was still sitting there unresolved, now the charge of it is much stronger, and it's just seeping into all this. Like it kind of is like a domino effect.
Yeah. Yep. And therein lies the definition of healing, right? Fundamentally, healing means to bring whole, right? To bring into unison. For spiritual people, you would say mind, body, and soul. For non-spiritual people, at least the mind and body, right? To really bring that into unison. And when we've experienced traumatic events, or we have that trauma inside of us, I think it disjoints us. I think it splits us apart. I think it splits apart that energy, and it can kind of create that chaos, which may not be apparent on the outside all the time, but is in a constant state on the inside. And when there is that catalytic event that occurs on the outside, then all of the trauma on the inside can start to kind of pop, non-literally speaking.
Yeah.
Right, because that trauma sitting there, it might be sitting there, we say sitting there, but it's actually sitting there running its own, like background, like taking up space, taking up energy, like you're saying. Like it's not just sitting there, it's actually affecting us in all these subtle ways that we don't see, we don't realize, because it becomes part of our program, right? We kind of cope around it. So it's sitting there, but it's not really sitting there. It's sitting there and we're walking around it, right? It's just the big elephant in the room that we just chose to put a cover on, and then we walk around it, right? So I wonder if you could get a little bit into maybe making a distinction for our audience between, like, everyone experiences trauma, right, in their lives, like small trauma into like PTSD, and also what are some tools that you suggest people use in one case or the other?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I think it's important to kind of break down that there are different levels of trauma. There are different kinds of trauma. Um, as human beings, I believe that we all want to be seen, heard, loved, cared about, and belong. There's a sense of community. We're social creatures, right? And if there is a traumatic event which occurs to us, very often we think of, hurricane or first responder, somebody, either witnessing directly death or the aftermath of war or some kind of traumatic event, a car accident or something like that, physical abuse, sexual abuse. These are often what people think about and kind of put a box around as trauma. But it goes far deeper than that. There are many other type of events. For instance, with me, it was a serious car accident. But then there are also these other traumas where it's like, it didn't happen for me and I really, really needed it to happen. And this can be isolated, but quite often is a repeated type of event, right? So I continually wasn't seen or heard or loved by my caretakers, whether that be my mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or whatever the case may be, right? And it's kind of what may seem small, but it's this continual process of not having our needs met, or wanting to belong and being told that we don't belong, or being rejected, which I think is fundamentally what's under the underlying thing with bullying, right? Is made to feel like I don't belong, made to feel like I'm not good enough. I don't say this to stigmatize people or to get people to, feel like they have to fall into some kind of victim mode. I think that there's enough unfortunate proponents of that out there in the world, right? Saying, oh, just you can be this victim, you can be this victim. So it's not that, right? I would caution the listeners and the viewers, right? It's not that, right? It's to identify, okay, so what didn't I get? What do I deserve, right? And now, how did that wire my mind? How did that wire my programming? Because if I didn't feel seen, heard, loved, cared about, or belonged, and I didn't, and that kept repeating, that traumatic event, maybe little t traumatic event, keeps happening over and over and over, the trauma inside is, well, I'm not worthy. Well, I'm not good enough. That's the program that it creates in our mind. Then we go out into the world subconsciously filling that program out, right? Well, I'm not deserving. And we get into relationships that are less than what we deserve. We take jobs that we get paid less than what we deserve, right? I mean, you name it. And so I don't know if that's too broad, but I feel like those are important distinctions.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to it in that way and really clarifying that that's trauma too, right? We often refer to all of that as limiting beliefs, or like going back to some event that was disempowering, traumatic. But like, I love the way you explained it. Like, we all experience trauma with a small t, but over time it can really, really affect our lives in an extensive way. It's just not as obvious as PTSD, like what I was describing, like feeling paralyzed, not being able to function in your life, right? But we are not functioning in our lives in different ways that are less visible. We're just completely unaware of it because it's become part of our program.
Well,
So
it feels normal.
It feels it's our normal. Yeah. It's our normal. Yeah.
It feels normal, but it's as a, and I kind of like one of the metaphors I like to use is and because it's Super Bowl coming up, I'll use a football. We take our who we are, like, and we kind of take that football and put it underwater and hold on to it and suppress it underneath there. And we think we're doing a really good job because there's a lot of effort in that. But the minute we let go, the minute that we realize that this thing that we've been operating, which is holding this football down, has been holding us back all our lives, right? The minute we can kind of let go of it, we're built to naturally rebalance. That's my belief. The minute we let go of it, just like if I cut my hand, right? Like the doctors will say, I can put the Band-Aid over it, but something else is going to take over the healing, right? We have a natural healing process. And we have the same thing with our minds and brains, right? Then when I let go of that small trauma or little trauma, or whatever you want to call it, and we were talking earlier, me and Fatí, about criticism. When I let go of criticism, it's like letting go of that football, and it naturally rises, and I can operate from that point of view rather than the struggle and effort that of holding that football down.
Mm-hmm. So beautifully said. So beautifully said. And the next level to that, Rick, is that you see when so many people operate their life by holding the football down. And by the way, this is done at a subconscious level, right?
Right.
People,
Oh yeah.
like you said, Rick, like that's just normal. No, it's not normal, right? That's not how God, Allah, Brahma, whatever you call your higher power, if you believe in a higher power, that's not how we were created to be, right? But we live, to continue with your football analogy, we live for so long. I was living it, and I didn't even realize I was living it. And there were some parts of my life I was living that you never would have been able to know. But there were some parts of my life where I was living it, and it was like, wow, okay, he's really living with that football under the water, right? When we get enough people that are living with the football under the water and it gets normalized enough, then people start to come together and coalesce around we're the people that live with the football under the water. No, that's not who you are. Healing is possible for you. That football can come up. There's love, joy, peace, happiness, abundance. All of that is possible for you. But the program makes us think, to your point, Rick, that it's normal, and it's not.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well done.
So how would you say, how should people recognize whether or not is, like, how would you tackle one, or tackle, let's say it's like PTSD, the person is not able, there's a lot that we can do on our end, right? To start looking at the trauma, to start processing it. Just like Rick is saying, by letting go and like expressing it is the first step, like the awareness there, and like being willing to look at it. So that's one type of work. But then when it's PTSD, like, what do you suggest people do in that case?
Yeah, first off, we have to have a willingness, right? Because you can have the best helper in the world, but if you don't have the willingness to heal, or the belief that healing is possible, even if it's just to some extent, then it's not going to happen, right? It's the person who believes. It's not what they believe in. It's the fact that they believe that the healing is possible for them that facilitates the healing, right? So it's got to come from an inner belief that I'm worthy, that I'm deserving, and that healing can be possible. That can be small, right? And it can come supported by other people as well, but it has to, at least some extent, come from the individual themselves.
100%.
From there, I think that getting yourself, whether that's a counselor, a therapist, a life coach, a spiritual coach, whether that's your participation in communication with your religious leader, meditation, all of these things that we can start, walking outside, exercise, whatever. These are all free or relatively low cost things that all of us have access to, right? Where we can start to push this conscious mind out of the way. We want to push the egoic programming out of the way, so that then we can get into the subconscious and get connected into the body, right? And say, okay, what is stored inside of me? Why is it that when I see the blue eyes, right, that is so triggering for me? What comes up in me there? What is that energy that is stored there? And allow it at a pace that the individual feels comfortable with. Your counselor doesn't set the pace. Your coach doesn't set the pace. Nobody sets the pace. You set the pace. And at a pace that you feel comfortable with, allowing that to come up. We got to feel it to heal it. That's why it takes so much courage to heal.
Right.
Yeah. And I like that. The feel, you have to feel it, and for me, especially in my practice, it is about the feeling part. It's about noticing the feeling and understanding what feeling is telling you, right? And we talk about finding purpose in pain. There's pain, right? And it brings our attention to something, right? But on my end, the suffering is optional. When you truly understand, what feelings are about, and the mechanism what pain's pointing towards.
I mean, the pain may feel painful for a while, but until you feel it, it's going to keep being painful. The moment that you feel it, you actually sit with the pain in your body, like you were saying, Ryan, like, where is this pain in my body? You allow it to just be painful. That's the moment that it starts dissolving. That's my experience, right? With my experience of PTSD, it had such a strong grip on me that I did a lot of different things. If I ever had to say what was it that helped me, I did a lot of different things. I was in bereavement groups, so I got a lot of that expressing it out. I had a therapist, and I also did EMDR. And that EMDR was actually key in like disconnecting me. Like there was an automatic reaction to that visual that I was just running, and I just couldn't. There was no way. There was no thinking in between, right? The visual came, and the reaction was already there. That triggered the feelings, and the feeling paralyzed. But once I did that, I was able to disconnect from that traumatic event, and then the real work started. And then the real work of processing it started, because I was no longer, as long as that was kicking in, I was completely unable to go into that part of my brain that was going to allow me to process, right? Because I was in fight or flight. I was 100% I was in freeze. I was in freeze.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And EMDR is great. I implement aspects of EMDR in my practice. Meditation, guided meditations, hypnosis, so many different things. It's different for everybody, right? Like, for instance, somebody that I work with that has been diagnosed with ADHD, right? They may not be able to use some of the modalities that other people use. The truth of the matter is, sometimes, like for me, sometimes I'll just sit and listen to all different kinds of music. One day it could be a spiritual music. One day it could be a house music. Could be Led Zeppelin. Could be whatever it is that I'm in the mood for that day. It's just whatever to move the conscious mind out of the way. And there's a million different approaches on how you can do that. I invite the listeners and the viewers to find one that works for you. My invitation would be to case conceptualize it as, how do I move my conscious mind out of the way? When is that little voice in my head the quietest? Is it when I'm out in nature? Is it when I'm taking my dog for a walk? Is it when I'm exercising? Is it when I'm doing EMDR? Whatever the case may be, when is that conscious mind out of the way? Because that's when we can do the deeper inner work.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, when you look at, I think there's like 450 plus modalities out there right now, right? And I've had people come to me who have tried different things. The unfortunate part with a lot of organizations, they're kind of stuck with one, and then if it doesn't work within your organization, then you're sort of left on your own, kind of a thing. But yeah, you're bang on when you say you got to find out, you are the expert of you.
Right.
Like I can't, I don't even want to give my advice, like, kind of a thing. Like, what should I do? No, you know what you need to do. You just need to listen a little bit more, right?
But I think part of that, and so true, like we know ourselves best, and we only can tell what works for us, right? Because not the same thing is not going to work for everyone. And you know what's part of that as well? Raising your hand and recognizing, I can't do this alone. I need help.
Yeah.
Right? That's part of it too. That we're not saying just figure it out on your own. It is okay to raise your hand and seek for that counselor, seek for the psychiatrist, seek for the expert that can help you. That's a part of it too.
They said that the 3 hardest words to speak is, I need help.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially I know in the responder world, those are tough words to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's a message of hope to all the listeners and the viewers out there. It took me 30 years to say I need help. Just about 30 years.
Mm.
So if you feel like it's been too long, if you feel it's going to take too much, if you feel, I don't know, fill in the blank as to something that's holding you back from feeling like you can or that you deserve it. It took me 30 years. And so it's never too late, and it's possible for every single one of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're not broken, to steal one of Rick's slogans. You're not broken. You're not broken.
No.
And you can get better. You can overcome this. And it's okay to ask for help, because part of not raising your hand is that, like, pushing it down, keeping it hidden. It's that attempt of holding that ball in the water, right?
That's it. Yeah.
So I'm really loving this conversation, and I want to ask you if you can just share with our listeners some of your work, where they can get your books. Do you want to mention some of your books, where they can find you? Let us know where we can find more of you, so that we can, stay in touch with your work.
I appreciate that. I say this to I'm a counselor licensed in 3 different areas, right? So in British Columbia, Canada, I'm a registered clinical counselor. So anybody in British Columbia can work with me. In the state of Oregon, I'm a professional counselor associate. And in the state of Washington, I'm a licensed mental health counselor associate. So if you live in any of those geographical territories, you can visit my website, RyanKopyarHolisticHealing.com, and you can, feel free to reach out to me. One thing that I would always say is there's a ton of different counselors out there. There's a ton of different professionals out there and helpers out there. Find somebody who resonates with you, right? I'm the bald guy. I say to people, like, I'm the bald guy who's super passionate and loud and things of that nature, right? If you don't feel that I'm a good fit for you, but there are some words of mine that are resonating, I would invite you to find somebody else who maybe their personality and style does match with you, right? But kind of incorporates some of what we've discussed today in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just speaking about this with one of my colleagues the other day. It's like, I think we should more normalize the fact that everybody is different and everybody is unique. And I can't help everybody. I'm not equipped to help everybody, right? But I encourage people to find somebody that they do vibe with, right? Who they can feel that they can have a conversation with. Because at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is about feeling comfortable to be vulnerable, to share it. So I share my information, but I always caution it to say, like, hey, if you're thinking about reaching out to somebody, I would encourage you to reach out and do some research, reach out to a few different people and see who it is that you feel comfortable with, because that's super important. I just don't feel it's gets spoken about enough. And the other thing is, I just got this home office set up here. So I don't know I guess it's this one. Unlock the Power of Your Mind, my book that I published.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlock the Power of Your Mind, I published in 2019. It's part autobiography, where I share a bit about myself and some of what we've discussed today in our awesome conversation, and then some life-changing quotes that helped me to begin to facilitate change in my life. I have another book called The Power of Words, which is in the editing stage, and I am just starting Feel It to Heal It. And I'm going to be launching a group counseling, and for anybody who lives in those geographical areas, it's going to be an online program specifically towards healing trauma, releasing and transmuting trauma, and the book, right? So it's going to be 3 different tools really focused on helping people that have experienced traumatic events in their life, have trauma inside, know they want to make a change, and just feel like they could use a little bit of help in that process.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I mean, our work is, for me, like sticks, a stick floating down the river, periodically gets stuck on the bank, and we don't pick up the stick and try and make it a better stick in some way, right? Or I'm gonna, we gently nudge it back into life. Right? And I get that. So I get that from you. I get that vibe from you. As much as you say you're loud, I think you have that gentle nudgeness about you too.
I love all your book titles, by the way. They deeply resonate with me. The power of words. Rick and I talk about words
Words are so powerful.
all the time. I mean, I encourage everyone to pick them up and start reading. And what a better way to get to know you and see if you're a fit.
Yeah.
Was it before we conclude? Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience? Any last words? Any message you want to leave them with? Something you feel like we didn't ask you?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say what it is that I do my best to share consistently with the individuals that I work with, and that is that healing is possible for each and every one of you. And you don't even have to believe that it's possible for you in this moment. You don't have to believe it. Just know that I believe it. Not only do I believe it, I know it. And Rick and Fatí, you could probably echo those same words, Fatí, right? You've done it, right? You see, there's a difference between believing and knowing. When you know something inside, it's just there. It doesn't take any belief. It's just this inner knowingness, right? So I get it. When we're down and out, when we're at our lowest of low, when we're at our rock bottom, when that program is really running at top speed in our mind, you're thinking, man, this big bald guy over there, like he's talking crazy. That's so far off. That's not possible for me. No, I promise you, it is possible for you. And it doesn't matter how long that trauma has been inside of you. It's energy. It's energy that can be transmuted. And there is purpose in your pain. There's power in your pain. But the only way to uncover it, the only way to unlock it, the only way to take it out is to go in. It's that inward journey. And boy, does that take a lot of courage. And boy, does that take a lot of resiliency. And boy, does that take a lot of fortitude. But all of that is possible. Get with Rick, get with Fatí, get with a counselor, get with your spiritual coach, get with somebody that you feel comfortable with that can believe in you and pour some of that belief in you long enough until you can start to find it in yourself. Because once you find it in yourself and that fire gets lit up and you start the healing process, that fire starts to crank up, and then you start to say, hey, okay, I got this. I can do this, right? Anyways, you get me all fired up here right before.
That was beautiful. I love what you just shared now. I mean, it really only takes one person believing in you to help you. It's contagious, right? To help you get going on that self-belief and like starting to collect that evidence that you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. I believe in you because I've done it. I've been there. I was able to transform this. I loved this last message that you left us with.
Yeah, very powerful.
No wonder you came on the show. We're so aligned. There's so much alignment and so much resonance. I was so looking forward to this conversation, and it did not disappoint one bit.
It's 53 minutes in, or almost the hour in, and it felt like we just started. So I honor you two both so much. Thank you so much for your time and for the invitation. And I wish you both the best. And I can tell that any individuals that have worked with you or are working with you or will work with you will be tremendously served by their time with you as well. So I echo that both to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll have another episode again soon.
Friday.
On Friday, yes, we're gonna sneak another one in. We usually do it on Wednesdays, but we've got some coordinating and we decided to put an extra one in on Friday. So we'll see you soon.
Until next, everyone.
Yeah, bye now.